I'm Scott Stuart, CEO of the Turnaround Management Association, and this is TMA Talks Live from the 2019 Distressed Investing Conference in Las Vegas, Nevada. Today we welcome Aaron Todrin, President of Second Wind Consultants. How are you, Aaron?
I'm very well, Scott. Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about you, background, a couple of minutes about what you do and how you got into this business.
I'm President of Second Wind Consultants. We are a business consulting firm. So I started as a bankruptcy practitioner, and for a number of years I worked with Chapter 7, Chapter 11 cases and really grew tired of watching businesses be needlessly destroyed. So we found an alternative mechanism to preserve business operations for distressed companies. We employ the Article 9 transaction, which I think is the most efficient transaction mechanism for any type of investment vehicle, and we've been working with that and working with distressed companies, regardless of industry, regardless of region, for the past 10 years all over the country.
That's terrific. Today we're going to talk about merchant cash advances, or MCAs, something I don't think a lot of people know about, but seems to have been getting a lot of attention lately. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit what MCAs are?
Definitely. So a merchant cash advance, an MCA, it's an alternative lending mechanism that's absolutely exploded over the past 5 years, where it's essentially like a business payday loan. These are groups that will give you $10 now for $20 in the future, and it's a very fickle beast. They do not call themselves loans, and they structure their paperwork so that they're not loans, and for that reason they're not regulated as loans.
So how does the money get advanced under an MCA?
It's very easy to get an MCA for companies that do not otherwise qualify for conventional lending, or they're in a tough financial situation. They need to seek alternative mechanisms, and MCAs have provided that safety net for them. So it's extremely easy to get the loans. You can qualify for a merchant cash advance within 24 or 48 hours. They look at the past 3 months of your revenue, and they come up with a number that they feel comfortable lending you. And honestly, it's almost as easy as pushing a button, and within 24 hours you'll have that
So
advance.
It's high debt, uncollateralized credit, basically.
That's correct. That's correct. It's collateralized by future revenue.
Future revenue, but in companies that are struggling to even get to that revenue.
That's correct.
And what are the ramifications of companies that, what are the ramifications that you've seen of companies who are using MCA as a financing vehicle to try to survive? And it sounds like a last-ditch effort at survival.
Yeah.
Unless I'm mistaken.
It's definitely a last-ditch effort for survival. People clawing for cash to maintain operations. They're already faced with insolvency. They're headed in that direction, and they take whatever they can get. The problem is the fine print they do not read. They're unfamiliar with what these MCAs entail. For example, daily withdrawals. These get paid out of the company's operating account every single day.
So is it essentially a lockbox and the accounts get swept?
It's not a lockbox. They have a pre-approved ACH removal process directly out of the operating account. But the problem is that that's very dangerous because they have access directly to your company's operating account.
So they're not lenders,
no,
but they have access to the company's cash on a daily basis, which gets ACH'd out.
That's correct.
Do they sign confessions of judgment when they make these loans, but they're not loans?
Right.
When these cash advances.
Yeah, they absolutely sign confessions of judgment. So right from the outset, if anything goes wrong, they have the power, and they do, to immediately file that confession of judgment. And because they have the direct access to your bank account, to the lifeblood of your operation, they can sweep that within 24 hours with the filing of that confession of judgment.
So how is this affecting businesses? And where are you seeing MCAs being used most? Is there any particular sector in the business community that's using MCAs, or are you seeing it just broad-based in any desperate situation?
So it used to be based on companies that do business on credit, net 30 terms, net 45 terms, things like that. But at this point, we see it widespread. Our Second Wind, we work with companies regardless of industry all across the country, and there is no limitation to what we've seen. Everywhere from manufacturing, service, agriculture, MCAs do not discriminate on who they lend against.
So how do you rescue companies that have taken MCAs, end up against the wall, and it sounds like there's no good recourse for the company and no way out?
Right. So it's a good point. There is no way out if we don't do something. And when you look at the MCA documentation, sometimes we've seen interest rates that amount to 350%, 400% when you include all of the fees and the daily amortization rates. So, it's very difficult for a company who's already faced with financial struggle to get out from under these situations. That's when we really need to conduct our Article 9 transactions, shut that business down, and find a way to preserve the operation through a strategic short sale.
And have you been successful at doing that? And even when you do the strategic short sale, how does this kind of debt get paid back, if it gets paid back at all?
Right. So, we don't know what to call it, so we keep on calling it a loan and debt. This is not debt. If you think about it, these MCAs are buying future business.
Right.
So if buying future revenue, future money, if that's a risk for them. So if the business shuts down, there's no more revenue coming in. So therefore, there's no default, there's no debt. It's not a loan. So the business owner of the distressed company, they don't owe any money. All they do is they promise that as money comes in, to pay the MCA their portion of it. So if money stops coming in, the deal is over.
So is this kind of like legal loan sharking?
Well, I think that there's a tremendous amount of abuse on these documents. So we talked about a confession of judgment that gets signed on the outset. Well, if the business shuts down, I argue that there's no debt, there's no default. The business shut down. The MCA took a risk and they lost that time. And they charge enough that they can incorporate that risk in their models. And the truth is that their default portfolios still represent a small percentage of their entire lending portfolio. So the problem is that they're treating it as a loan. And if the business shuts down, they look at what the deficiency balance is, and they go after the personal guarantee.
So is it more? So it's basically used a cash advance at a very high interest rate that I'll call them the lender for argument's sake, that the lender knows they're never going to, in most cases, that the company is never going to pay out. So this is a way to right now legally allow the lender to effectively steal the company.
Well, let me take a step back. In theory, I have no problem with this concept. I have no problem with the capitalistic world that we live in. If the market bears a demand for high-yield short-term loans, that's okay. But I do have a problem with the abuse of the collection tactics thereafter. And if the business shuts down, they lost on that deal. And they're not treating it like that. They're treating it like a loan, and they're going after the balance. So they're not trying to steal companies. They don't do anything like that. But they do try to squeeze the company dry to collect every last cent when they're going outside of the boundaries.
So would it be fair to say this is kind of like factoring on steroids?
It is like the cheap, dirty version of factoring.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
So what do you think the future of MCAs are?
Well, there's been a lot of attention to the MCAs lately. There's been most of the MCAs exist in New York, and New York has officially shut down the acceptance of COJs being filed, which is great because a COJ is a very antiquated legal mechanism that it was never anticipated that it would be used for this purpose.
Right.
So they've stopped that, which is great. There's been articles being written in very public news outlets. There has been legal action, there's been legislative action, and that's what I really hope for, is that legislation catches up, because they are way behind this industry, and they're running around, and it's the Wild West out there of alternative lending for companies that are already in financial trouble.
So it sounds like the future of MCAs might be in doubt. It sounds like the regulators might be looking hard at them, and this form of lending might be short for life.
It might be short, at least in its current form. Again, I have no problem with the concept as long as it's regulated. So if they are willing to take their losses when they lose and take their victories on their 350% APRs when they win, then I'm okay with that. And I think that's where we're headed.
Aaron, thank you so much. This is very insightful and very helpful, and we look forward to hearing more about your work in this area. Aaron Todrin, President of Second Wind Consultants. I'm Scott Stuart, CEO of the Turnaround Management Association at DIC 2019 Live. More interviews to come.